We're here in the swamplands of the Point Lookout State Park at the southern tip of Maryland. The air is thick with humidity and the dense fog which rolls over the murky waters. Gnarled trees stretch their twisted branches over the marshes and putrid bogs. This land with its labyrinth of waterways and thick vegetation is quite simply haunting. As one of the earliest English colonial settlements, and a site of battles ranging from the War of 1812 to the Civil War, Point Lookout is a place steeped in history of a troubled and violent past. The problem is, Point Lookout never really left that past behind, quickly becoming a land largely forgotten by the rest of the United States. Infrastructure here was minimal, poverty was widespread, and the rural communities of this wet and rugged region grew increasingly isolated from the rest of the population. Some enterprising individuals did attempt to capitalize on the area's unique charm. The Blackhall family in particular spearheaded the commercialization of Point Lookout, transforming it into a bustling pleasure destination, with its famous Pilgrim's Landing boardwalk. This development, however, created a stark division in the region's society. The central area became home to new settlers from nearby cities, those drawn by the promise of work and a fresh start, while the locals retreated further into the haunted swamplands. When the bombs of the Great War eventually fell, Point Lookout's isolation became its shield, sparing it from the worst of the devastation that ravaged the outside world. And while we don't really know what happened to the city folk, whether they fled, were killed off, or became the primitive society of tribals that dwell in the region, if we venture beyond the now derelict and abandoned boardwalk, into the dense thickets and irradiated backwaters, here we'll find what has become of the reclusive locals. They are now known by many names: the Hillfolk, the Yokels, but to those who encounter them and live to tell the tale, they are known simply as the Swampfolk. Now, despite no bombs actually falling on Point Lookout itself, the effects of radioactive fallout are still evident in the region. The contaminated waters of the Potomac River flow from the irradiated capital wasteland through to Point Lookout, carrying with them increased levels of radiation. This radiation has seeped into the marshland, having a particularly pronounced effect on the isolated rural locals. For years, these locals have been engaging in inbreeding, which, combined with their irradiated homeland, has given them sinewy, pockmarked bodies that ooze in both strength and pus. Most of them have misshapen heads and various other deformities, and oddly enough, many of them look relatively similar, likely due to their genetic pool being about as deep as a particularly shallow puddle. There are, however, 5 unique variants of the Swampfolk, identified and colloquially named by others in the region. First up, we have the Brawlers. These are large men often seen clothed in dirty overalls and work boots. Their rough and leathery skin covers bodies surprisingly free of the deformities plaguing other Swampfolk, except for a large protrusion on the left side of their face, giving it an asymmetrical appearance. Brawlers are often armed with rifles and shotguns, fiercely pursuing any outsiders who dare trespass on their territory. Then there are the Scrappers. They have malnourished, gaunt bodies with swollen bellies and malformed heads. Their sallow, dirty skin is stretched over sunken features and lopsided jaws. Clad in tattered jeans and worn-out work boots, they might look weak, but don't be fooled. Despite their emaciated appearance, Scrappers are surprisingly tough. Anecdotal accounts from those that have faced them and survived state that Scrappers can take more damage than even a super mutant. Next we have the Creepers, the nearly indistinguishable cousins, or, knowing their breeding habits, the cousin brothers of the Scrappers. Sharing the same wiry frame, Creepers are set apart by their blonde hair and blood-soaked appearance, with gore and viscera often surrounding their mouths. Then we have the Trackers. These imposing figures stand over 7 feet tall. They wear tattered green shirts, white vests, and patched-together jeans, all just a bit too small for their bodies, which have been transformed by the area's irradiated swamp. Their postulating, scar-covered skin stretches over swollen arms, and their misshapen heads are characterized by a divot on the left side of their skull. These powerful brutes lead the charge when a Swampfolk party ambushes, limping towards their prey with an axe in hand, their swollen fingers too large to use any firearms. Instead, they get in close, using their massive limbs and overwhelming strength to clobber their foes. They can take an immense amount of damage and are said to be tougher to take down than a Deathclaw. Finally, there's the Bruiser, closely related to the Trackers. They are nearly identical in appearance, except they wear mechanic outfits covered in blood and have blackened, sharp fingernails. In the eerie stillness of the Point Lookout swamplands, the Swampfolk live a life shrouded in isolation. It's debatable whether they are even aware of the Great War that reshaped the rest of the world. They have a distrust of outsiders and authority that predates the war. When aid workers were sent to the region to help inoculate the locals against a new plague that had begun sweeping across the nation in the 21st century, the aid workers were assaulted by the residents of the deep swamps. And during the Great War itself on October 23, 2077, a US Navy jet crashed in rural Point Lookout. The unfortunate pilot found himself tangled in a tree by his parachute, and the locals, rather than offering to help this outsider who had fallen from the sky, promptly butchered the trapped and helpless airman. The homes of the Swampfolk scattered throughout the deep wetlands are rustic wood cabins. Inside, they are believed to live in family units. Though female Swampfolk are rarely seen, they do exist, and give birth to Swampfolk children. But not all are born with the deformities typical of their kind. Those born without the so-called Point Lookout look face a grim fate, either hidden away in their family's basements or cast out due to the fear that they might be mistaken for outsiders and shot by their own kin. Despite their isolation, the Swampfolk do engage in some form of trade with the local humans of Point Lookout. They do not barter in caps, however, instead trading in mysterious meats or the region's famous punga fruit, which the Swampfolk are known to grow on their own small farmsteads. At night, if you are brave enough to venture close to the eerie glow emanating from a Swampfolk campsite, you might witness a macabre spectacle, the Swampfolk engaging in a dance around their fires. Hunting is a crucial part of their daily life, as it has been since before the Great War. Trappers in particular are skilled at hunting a variety of prey, laying bear traps throughout the swampland in hopes of capturing humans, swamp ghouls, or mirelurks, often pitting their captured prey against one another in their own sinister form of gladiatorial entertainment. When hunting humans, the Swampfolk hunt in packs, demonstrating a sinister level of strategy and intelligence. A typical hunting party includes at least one melee attacker, usually the strongest of the group, who charges at their prey while the others hang back, taking shots with their firearms from distance. Their cunning extends beyond setting traps. They are also skilled in ambushing prey, such as setting frag mines outside buildings where outsiders might be hiding, or attacking wastelanders as they walk over a bridge, cutting off both ends and means of escape. When they catch someone, the fate of the unfortunate victim is grim. The Swampfolk are known to scalp and eat their captives, as evidenced by the Bruiser and Creeper variants often seen with gore and viscera around their mouths, or the presence of strange meat pies in Swampfolk dwellings. Sometimes they might even use their prey in a ritualistic human sacrifice, as the increasingly deranged behavior of these swamp dwellers may not entirely be their own doing. Over the centuries, they have fallen under the influence of Constance Blackhall, the matriarch of the Blackhall family and sister to the enigmatic Richard Dunwich of the mysterious Dunwich Borers Company. You see, Constance shared her brother's fascination with the occult, and the wealth gained from revitalizing Point Lookout was all funneled into her obsession. She sought out archaic texts and hunted down artifacts, notably the occult tome, the Krivbeknir, which she used to form her own cult based out of Point Lookout, dedicated to the worship of the eldritch horror, Ugh-Kwaloth. And this occult influence over the locals continued even after the Great War. After Constance died, the Krivbeknir ultimately found its way into the possession of the Swampfolk, and to this day, They continue their bloody rituals and religious chanting, carrying on the dark traditions taught to them by the Black Halls. In the dead of night, their eerie chants echo through the swamp as they torture and sacrifice their victims at their ancient ritual site. However, there's an argument to be made that this ritualistic behaviour is merely performative. Perhaps it is an empty set of traditions followed by the Swampfolk out of habit, merely mimicking their ancestors before them. The true meaning and knowledge behind their worship of Ukkqualoth may have been lost to time with Constance Blackhall. What remains is a haunting performance of rituals whose original purpose have long been forgotten. So if you were foolish enough to take a trip here to Point Lookout, whether it was to admire the swamp or take in the sights of the derelict boardwalk, how would you survive a brush with these backwater brutes? Well, all we can say is good luck. Tough, strong and fast, the Swampfolk know their territory inside and out. Despite their low level of intelligence, they possess an evil sort of cunning, one that makes them the alpha predator in their own little corner of the wasteland. Our best advice? Just steer clear of their territory. Luckily for you, it is clearly marked. The areas where they live and hunt are decorated with specific icons and effigies, not too dissimilar from those used in old voodoo practices. Totems made from roots woven through branches around teddy bears, dolls, impaled mannequin heads, and the skeletal remains of humans and Brahmin, all combine to form macabre warning signs for outsiders not to cross. As the Swampfolk are incredibly territorial and xenophobic, attacking anyone they don't recognise on sight, the only surefire way to survive an encounter with these guys and gals is, well, to be born in the area. The marsh folk, regular humans born locally in Point Lookout, are known to be left well alone by the Swampfolk, because fundamentally, while Swampfolk may be monstrous occult-worshipping cannibals, they really just want one thing, the same thing they have wanted for hundreds of years. They wish to be left alone to continue living apart from the outside world, free from its chaos and intrusions. And they're not going to let a couple of thousand nuclear bombs, mutated crabs, or even a nosy vault dweller get in their way. Have you had any particularly frightening run-ins with the Swampfolk? Let us know down in the comments and make sure to subscribe to join us again soon. Until then, catch you next time.